Probably more negatively than positively, as my mum would probably attest to.
It's a big distraction for when I'm trying to study, especially for exams.
Sort of not too much because I don't have social media, which is one of the main influences.
Yeah, they don't really mind it that much. It's just not to use it too much and just don't burn up your data or else they get really angry at you.
Oh, they love it, they can't get enough. They, Mum sits down in my bed with me just before I go to sleep and we scroll through Instagram together. She loves it.
Well, I think Josh sort of, well, he did lie. Mum hates them. Dad, like, he's neutral about them. He doesn't want us on them that much, but Mum will just take them off us at random times and stuff, and she just hates them.
Yep. Maybe once or twice.
Oh, I could. Doesn't mean I want to.
Yeah, I've definitely fallen asleep with my phone in my hand, probably, at least every couple of weeks, definitely, yeah.
I like Snapchat, Instagram.
Instagram and Snapchat.
Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook.
Mostly Instagram, Snapchat, messages, emails. I check my emails a lot.
Watching a YouTube video.
Just mostly YouTube and Instagram.
I watch Netflix and YouTube a fair bit. Seabreeze app.
I just like to troll through Instagram a little bit, see what's going on in the world around me, even though that's probably not the best place to figure out what's going on. Probably spend some more time on ABC News, but Instagram's good for us young kids.
Coming along before term has even started to have a listen to Save Our Sleep. The two most interesting parts of that for me was when Josh's younger brother threw him way under the bus, because I don't know if you realise, but those two were brothers. So Josh is trying to tell us that Mum and Dad love it, and of course the younger brother says no way. And the other one is Seabreeze is a favourite app. Yeah, likely, I've heard that one before. For those of you who are boating people, you would know what I mean. It's nothing to do with social media. Like I say, thank you very much for coming along tonight. I really believe it's going to be an informative session tonight. And just by way of introduction, I just wanted to give you some context for this evening and why we're doing what we're doing. The first is, from my perspective, sleep is actually something I worry about. I worried about it pretty much all my parenting life, and I've worried about it especially as an educator. When I was a boy, on a Sunday night, there was absolutely no doubt that my father had me in bed at 7:30 on a Sunday night in preparation for the school year ahead. And I remember doing that, unfortunately, and this could say something more about me than anything, happening when I was still 16, 17 years of age. And when I first became a parent and realised that others didn't value the sleep the same way my family did, I started to ask questions as to why. I guess the other part is that increasingly I'm seeing research that suggests that we actually do take a lack of sleep for granted. And I've just got a little bit of research here which was from the University of Queensland. I know we've all seen it. This was just as recently as March this year. But sleep has a direct impact on social behaviour, mental health, obesity. Sleep can heal. In fact, you die if you don't sleep quicker than you starve to death. And I'm sure we could actually all pick out various things. But I find it interesting that in our society right now, we probably almost wear it as a badge of honour if I can get by with less sleep, because obviously, apparently, I'm more productive in some way. Point two to the context of this evening is all about phones. Phones, phones, and phones. And I'm a parent of boys in the middle school, the senior school, and also the junior school, like many of you here tonight as well. And I think I would be as one when I say that we all worry about phones and what impact this is having and the arguments it causes in our house. I don't know, does anyone have an argument about phones in their house? Anyone at all? Yep. Yeah, it's probably part of the reason you're actually here. Now, we've just had the most amazing holiday ourselves in the Kimberley, the Deloro family, and we were up camping, and I must admit, since the invention of smartphones, I don't think I've actually ever, embarrassingly, had 9 or 10 days away from my phone like I just did in the Kimberley, because I had no choice, there was no reception. So, similarly, our three boys also didn't have access to their phones, and nor did my wife. And the five of us did some really strange things. It's very cliche, isn't it? But we played cards. It was dark at 10 past 5, and we read in the tent and shared our books and discussed, and we're up at sunrise. And of course, I thought this was magical. I thought, I'm going to tell you all about how this has changed our life, and my teenage son's seen the light and he's going to, change his ways. And as soon as we got to Fitzroy Crossing and got back into reception, we were all back onto our devices. So phones is the second context to this. And third is that last year, we began some really, really great work with our boarding community and our boys in boarding around we need to get some structure around how we want phones to be used, when they're to be put away, when they're in their rooms and when they're not. And in a boarding environment, it's relatively easy to do because we're all doing often the same thing at the same time. It's quite regimented. And it was Mr. Brett Will over here who was discussing it with me, saying, look, we've got some great structures here, and we're going to roll this out for our Year 7s through to 11s. And includes when you hand them in. And this is a great idea. And it occurred to both of us at the time that that's 20% of our student population, fantastic. But for the other 80%, which is our day families, what are we doing for them? We do not have a position, as it were, on mobile phones, their impact on sleep and the importance of. And so that was the second part for the context of tonight, because we really wanted to have the opportunity to start a conversation. That is what tonight is about. It is a Q&A session, question and answer. I suspect we probably shouldn't call it Q&A because I don't know if we have the answers. Maybe it's a Q&D. It's a question and discussion. And I'll talk a little bit more about where that will head to perhaps later on. So I guess in summary, I did find it a little amusing when the Victorian government late last term, announced that they're banning phones in all schools. Banning is a strong word, isn't it? Because I think Hale's been in a best practice position from a day school perspective where, as you know, we don't allow phones. And, the vast majority of boys would say that's great. It offers less distraction. And so what we're trying to do tonight is to actually delve into the after hours, into the evening, highlight the importance of sleep, and in doing so, talk about these darn phones that annoy us all so very much. So, as I say, thank you again for coming tonight. Can I start the evening now by introducing Nisha Seth? So Nisha is sitting here in the middle, who is going to be our MC this evening and is going to run this panel, I'm sure, beautifully for us. And just by way of introduction, Nisha is an experienced organisational psychologist, and she's also been a television presenter over the past 15 years. Nisha's worked across a diverse array of industries to assist organisations to optimise their human potential. Nisha holds several degrees and qualifications, including a Bachelor of Science majoring in Psychology, a Bachelor of Commerce majoring in Human Resources and Industrial Relations, and a Master of Psychology, Industrial and Organisational from the University of WA. In her current role, Nisha works for a private psychological firm and is the Principal Account Manager for an organisational psychology services called PeopleSense. Throughout her years of practice, Nisha has provided both clinical and organisational interventions using evidence-based treatment to benefit both individuals and organisations. Her current area of greatest focus is working with both government and private organisations in the development of psychological safe workplaces through the implementation of proactive psychosocial strategies and processes. I've worked with Nisha a little bit now in preparation for this, and we've had her do a number of things here at the school with our staff. Nisha is absolutely a grounded and authentic person with a genuine interest to assist others to be the best version of themselves. So if I could ask you please to welcome Nisha to her role for this evening.
Sitting next to Brett, we've got Mr. Chris King. Welcome to the panel. Now, Chris is a very passionate parent here at Hale School. Sandra, his wife, and Chris have sent 3 of their sons. One son has graduated successfully last year, and that is Tom. So some of you gentlemen sitting next to me might know Tom. But still with 2 sons here at Hale School. So we've got Oliver in Year 11 and Harrison in Year 10. Now, Chris has a story in terms of how he has assisted in encouraging this panel to come together. Both Chris and Dean had a discussion, I believe, not too long ago at a local rugby game here on a Saturday, and we're discussing the important facets that Dean's talked through there about the importance of understanding the impact of technology on the well-being of all of our boys here at Hale School. So Chris is very keen to be a part of the panel this evening and add a parent's perspective. So thank you for coming on the panel. Okay, sitting next to me is Mr. Jordan Pearce, a current Year 12 student. Welcome to the panel. Are you excited to be here?
Of course, yeah. Very excited to learn, hopefully, something.
Now, we have seen you up there. You're a movie star now. How does it feel?
Yeah, pretty good to be kind of, I don't know, getting my name out there in the big stage. Yeah, good to see.
Wonderful. Very important to be a part of the solution as well. So I really thank you for coming up this evening, and we'll look forward to your contribution throughout the evening. Okay, now sitting to my left, thank you, sorry. Just too excited to get the evening going. To my left, TJ, welcome to the panel. How are you?
I'm feeling pretty excited. Yeah.
And were you happy with your performance on the big screen there?
Quite happy. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, as technology has it, and isn't this really funny, I've logged myself out of my Surface Pro, so give me one moment and I'm going to just log straight back in. I'm in between generations, you'll see that coming up. So sitting next to TJ, we're very, very lucky to have a paediatrician with us this evening. A little bit of a wave there, Dr. Adelaide Withers. She's a respiratory and sleep paediatrician at Perth Children's Hospital. Now, Dr. Withers is extremely passionate. She has a strong interest in adolescent health, and in addition of being a part of the Australian Medical Association, she's recognised as a youth-friendly doctor. And maybe she can tell us a little bit more about the importance of that later, but a lot of work goes into actually being a youth-friendly doctor. She trained for 5 years in adolescent medicine, in addition to respiratory and sleep medicine. She's worked for as a senior doctor in the adolescent team and adolescent clinics for many years. She's also a researcher at the Telethon Kids Institute, which is fantastic. And she's currently also been provided with a grant, which is, they're quite hard to come by these days, I understand, Adelaide as well, by the Muscular Dystrophy Association, WA, to actually research sleep-disordered breathing and respiratory function in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Quite a mouthful there. So congratulations. So we're looking forward to Adelaide adding her knowledge, particularly in the medical system, her extensive knowledge in sleep to the panel this evening. Please welcome Adelaide. I'd like to welcome Emma Quigley to the panel, a clinical psychologist and very esteemed clinical psychologist, I may add, working at Edith Cowan University. She's a director of a psychological training clinic there and also the head of the clinical psychology program at Edith Cowan University. She's worked in the area of mental health for over 20 years, so the extensive knowledge in behavioural strategies is going to be a great addition to tonight's panel. So thank you very much for coming on board. As well as working in the private system, she's worked for the Department of Child Protection. She's also worked in the disability services sector and the mental health services with Life Without Barriers, a very well-known organisation. She's worked also regionally in Western Australia. She's worked across a multitude of very diverse locations, which is important. And all her roles have really focused on getting the best out of other people and obviously helping and assisting in both the adult and the adolescent space. So very much looking forward to your contribution to behavioural strategies this evening. Please welcome Emma. Fantastic. Well, I don't know about you, but very, very excited to have such expertise on the panel. So without further ado, we are going to get started with our program this evening. Just by way of introduction, we do have a number of semi-structured questions that we are going to be asking the panel. However, as Dean has mentioned earlier, we will open up to a Q&A or Q&D, as Dean mentioned, towards the end of the panel discussion. However, I'm going to play this very organically. If you have a burning question, put your hand up and we'll see how we go. I might be able to jump out and get you to answer it during. We'll just have to see how we go for time. So let's get started. First question, and please do let me know. Yep, definitely up there, fantastic. First question, I'm inviting the whole panel to contribute. They have an opportunity to speak for approximately 2 minutes. So we all have a view and perspective of the impact of how technology has impacted on the well-being of our boys. What are your general observations of this impact? I'll hand straight down to you, Brett.
Thank you. I think it's really important that in my intro we talked about the partnership between students, parents and the school, and it's really important that from our perspective that boys are ready for school and that sleep, good sleep is essential to their well-being, it's essential to building their resilience, it's essential to academic success, and also their regular exercise and resilience.
Thank you, Brett. We'll pass on to Chris. From a parent's perspective, talk us through what impacts you see.
Sure. Thanks, Nisha. And I should qualify, I'm not sitting here as an expert parent at all, but with 3 teenage boys, I have some experiences of the trials and tribulations, and perhaps you can relate to some of those. My 2 youngest boys were really pleased you mentioned their names, Nisha. They were horrified I'd even sit on the panel tonight, so they would remain nameless, Oliver and Harrison. But perhaps I'll refer to Thomas, who left last year. I was speaking to another Hale dad last week, and just about this evening, he wasn't able to be here. But we're just having a general conversation about the impact of technology, and more specifically, mobile phones. And I think he summed it up from his perspective, saying, I really think I've got great relationships with my boys, but there's only one thing that causes grief, and it causes grief constantly, and that's mobile phones. And so appreciating that doesn't mean that exists in every family that's here this evening, and it doesn't mean it's a constant day in and day out. But it's interesting from a generational perspective, we were talking earlier about that, Nisha, about the generation I'm 55, 56, as against a 15, 16 and 18-year-old, how they see mobile phones and technology, and I'm really interested in the boys' perspective on that this evening. Just with 2 very, very quick insights, and perhaps I can share some of those this evening. We had a very similar experience, Dean, to you. We went up to Carragini about 4 years ago and made a decision with the boys not to take their phones, and that was in itself an interesting conversation. But for Thomas, our 14-year-old at the time, his right arm was connected to his phone, and within an hour it was actually confronting the fact of he actually re-engaged back with the family, and that was within an hour. His demeanour changed, his way of being changed, and his capacity to engage changed. What was equally confronting 10 days later, he got back and within 10 minutes he had materially changed his way. He had an intensity about him that was materially different, and his capacity to engage in a warm and loving family way was definitely different and impacted. So I think that in itself was not scientific evidence per se, and I'm sure the ladies with the expertise will give some insights into that, but I thought that was interesting. My other very quick insight was, and specifically about mobile phones and sleep, that one night Sandra and I woke up and it was about midnight, 12:30, and we heard someone talking, and she said, "Someone's sleep talking." I said, "That's not sleep talking," and it was, of course, our dearly beloved Thomas on the phone. And in suggesting to him that he give his phone to me, that went to and fro for about a minute and a half, and to the point where, "Give me your phone." And he said, "Dad, you're so unfair." And he said, "Look, all my mates are allowed to be on the phone." And he showed me his phone, and it was just pages and pages of, in this case, boys, and in fact some girls, communicating with each other at 12:30 on whatever it was, a Tuesday or Wednesday night. And it took me to a position of thinking, am I the one that's got it wrong? Are parents endorsing this with their children? Are parents not aware that this is what their teenage children are doing? Or are they just in a position where they've just got tired of trying to battle perhaps a lose a battle, win a war. So I thought that was really interesting, and it sort of led to some of my interest in this and the conversation I had with Dean about our responsibility as parents to ensure our boys can turn up to school in the best space, the best way possible, so Hale can be as effective as they can be in their role of what we expect of them, similar to what you're saying, Brett. So, yeah, as a parent, I'm sure we can all share some war stories, but it's challenging to say the least.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chris. I'm sure there's a lot of parents nodding and understanding your perspective there. Talking about switching through generations as well. So, Jordan, and with all respect, Chris, just say, Jordan, from your age in terms of being a young man here at Hale in Year 12, and I'd like to just say it's very courageous for both of these gentlemen to be on stage, probably outnumbered by the amount of maybe parents and teachers and so forth in the room. So be open, because it's for growth in terms of your perspective. What's your thoughts on the impact of technology on your well-being?
Yeah, so I'm certainly outnumbered here in terms of my demographic, and my parents sit in the audience, so I have to be careful of what I say here. But it was quite interesting to listen to what you're saying, Chris, because it's kind of like I'm the complete opposite, but I can kind of relate to kind of what your children are doing and kind of emulate with my parents' perspectives, I guess. The mobile phone's kind of revolutionised the world, and it's got all these positive and negative impacts, and it's hard to manage and manipulate the right ones at such the age that we're at. I guess they serve as a big distraction, and that's certainly true for a lot of Year 12 students especially, and maybe I can speak for years below me, but there's almost constant kind of information coming through so many different social media platforms that sometimes it can be hard to ignore, and it's hard to kind of step away from it, because you might go back to study and you think, oh, maybe I've missed a message, or oh, what am I missing out on that other people are currently looking at? So it can kind of be that kind of battle with yourself about what you should be doing and what you are doing. I remember in Vietnam, Cambodia, in some parts of rural Cambodia, we didn't actually have interconnection. Unfortunately, our hotel, well, I say unfortunately, ran out of Wi-Fi. Well, the Wi-Fi cut out for 3 days due to power strikes or something. So, we had 18, 17-year-old boys without their phones for 3 days, which doesn't seem like much, but to us was a big disaster. And I don't know, it was just kind of weird to think about it, because we had this awesome place with soccer fields and volleyball nets and all these games, but we just wanted to sit on our phones and kind of not really embrace the environment we're at. And I guess that was a moment for me where I was like, oh, maybe I need to get my priorities in check, I guess, a bit more. Yeah, for sure.
Well, clearly you're a gentleman with a good reflective skill set, which is very important. Thank you for your views. And now I'm going to pass over to TJ. What's your view?
Oh, well, first off, I love my phone, but can never get enough of it. But I definitely think, from my mom's perspective, probably that my life just revolves around it, and I just can't get off it, or so she would say. But I remember my ex-mouth camp last year, we had to give our phones in on the first day, and I remember it was really weird just not being able to just check what's happening with everyone. That wasn't on the camp. But then as the camp went on, it just felt really natural just to talk to everyone and just be included with all the group activities. But when the camp finished, it almost felt weird to be back on my phone, which is, I don't know, that never thought that would happen. But yeah, I just think that my life probably revolves too much around my phone, and it's probably not the best. And as an athlete, I should be resting more instead of being on my phone, so I can develop the best that I probably can.
Wonderful. Thank you, TJ. Now we're handing across, too many microphones again. Handing across to Dr. Withers. I'd be very interested, and I'm sure our audience will be, in your view on the impacts as well.
Cool, thanks, Nisha. So firstly, I wanted to say that, Chris, the statistics actually back you up. So it's well known that surveying young people, up to 40 to 50% will be doing text messages between midnight and 3 a.m. Many children will be woken during the night by getting status updates on Facebook or phone calls. So you are backed up by the statistics. It is actually the normal, and the most mobile phone use has been shown to happen in the first sort of half hour just after lights go off. So I think especially our younger panellists have highlighted really nicely the stress young people feel about being constantly connected, and you feel like you need to be accessible all the time. And as a sleep physician, the main concern I have about technology's effects on sleep is the fact that we know it causes sleep restriction, so a reduced amount of sleep, and it causes sleep interruption, so you don't get a good restful sleep if you're constantly being woken. And this has really significant impacts on not only your physical health, but your mental health, and also your learning and memory, which obviously is really important for these young men, particularly in year 11 and 12, when they're really setting themselves up for what careers and their life trajectories. We know that the physical effects of sleep interruption and reduced amount of sleep are short-term and long-term, and they include things like decreased memory and learning, increased vulnerability to car accidents. Long-term, it can affect your blood pressure, your cardiovascular health, increase your cortisol levels, which is a stress hormone. And it's actually been shown in a cohort of young people that the more mobile phone use they had at night, the higher their weight and body mass index became. It also has really significant effects on your mental health, and I'm sure that's something Aima's going to highlight as well, that there's really sort of a two-way relationship between your sleep quality and your mental health. So we often see problems like anxiety and depression being worsened by lack of sleep or poor sleep, and as a doctor I often see young people who'll come to me because they have a sleep problem, and then I'll actually find the underlying problem is actually anxiety or depression. So as well as the effects on learning and memory, there's huge physical and mental health effects on poor sleep, which I'd like to talk more about tonight.
Wonderful, thank you. Over to you, Emma.
So a lot's been covered, and I think the students really highlighted two different perspectives, and that's where I come from. Everybody is an individual, so it's really about how do you engage with your mobile phone, with technology, and what impact do you feel it has on your life and your health. We know the research says that it does have a significant effect on our physical well-being, our mental health, our cognitive capacities, across the board. But for each person in the room, adults and children alike, how do you feel you engage with your phone? What needs are being met by your phone that perhaps could be met by a real person beside you rather than a stranger on the other side of the world? Similarly, we had motivation around sport, a feeling of, I really want to achieve the best I can be, and is that holding you back? So what needs are the phone giving to you, but also what are you avoiding? So we go for our phone whenever we're bored. I got here half an hour early. I was checking both my phones, my personal phone, my work phone, catch up on my emails, make sure everything's okay, because I won't be able to check it for a few hours, right? So that's kind of what we do. And then I thought, no, I'm just going to leave it and I'm just going to appreciate the beautiful surroundings of Hell School and the trees, and the sun was setting, and that was lovely. So it's about what are you avoiding and what's that about for you? Everybody's different. So I guess that's my point of view, is trying to reflect a little bit and start the conversation with yourself and start it with your families.
Great points from both of you ladies. Why is sleep important? Obviously brain development, it's critical. So maybe if you could talk through how it helps learning, integrates, and brain development in general, that would be really interesting.
Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of you know that our brains continue to develop until we're about 25 years of age. So for all of the students in the room, still developing and continue to develop till we're about 25 years of age. So what we know about young people in particular, there's two things that are key that relate to mobile phone use and sleep. The first one is our melatonin. So melatonin is our sleepy hormone. It's what makes us want to go to sleep. I call it the baby hormone. So when you look at babies and they're really sleepy, that just is the representation of melatonin for me. When we're teenagers, our melatonin kicks in about 2 hours later than adults. So parents in the room are kind of falling asleep, 8 or 9 o'clock, we're getting sleepy. The young people, the teenagers in the room, are kind of pumped up, and they don't start to feel sleepy till about 10, 11 o'clock at night. So we know that the melatonin release is different. What we also know, in the morning, it takes a little bit longer for the melatonin to release out of the system with adolescence. So therefore, for the boys here on the panel, waking up groggy and just taking a lot longer to get going in the morning. So that's really an important difference for everybody to be aware of.
Are we smiling because you agree?
Yeah, for sure.
Sorry to interrupt you there. I was getting affirmation.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
All right.
Yeah.
Confirmation.
So that will change in a few years' time, and your melatonin will be released quicker from your body, and hopefully you will wake up a little bit easier. So there's light at the end of the tunnel. The second part that I wanted to talk about was dopamine, which is one of our happy hormones, and in adolescence is lower than in adults and young children. So people that have young children, they kind of bounce along for many years, then they hit teenage years and they kind of go into a bit of a slump. That's partly our dopamine. So we know that. What we also know is that when we get things that we want, or we think we're going to get something that we like, what essentially happens is we get a spike in our dopamine. So we feel good, so we want to do it again and again and again. And so what happens for teenagers that's a bit different to adults is that spike is greater. So when you're on Instagram, and I've just learned that they've taken away the likes, and you get a like, or you're on Facebook, or somebody shares your post, or somebody tags you into something, and you get that kind of happy feeling, that can become quite addictive, and more so with younger people, because of the dopamine effect is different. And I think Adelaide's going to continue on a little bit as well.
Yeah, wonderful. Adelaide, I'm just flipping through because I think we've moved quite quickly, as is very good, because we've got lots to talk about this evening. But the next slide, we wanted to talk about the developing brain. Was that what you were comfortable to?
Yeah, sure.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. And I think it's really important to highlight what you were just talking about with the dopamine rush, because one of the reasons that the likes have just been removed from Instagram is apparently a lot of young people are feeling quite sad if people aren't liking their photos, and they're not getting that positive reinforcement. And I think it's really important that we recognise there's actually other ways which are probably a lot more important for you to get validation, not just from the likes on your photos, but actually talking to people and engaging with them. So your developing brain, sleep is absolutely essential for your brain to function. And lots of things happen when you're asleep. So sleep is like a restoration for your body. And it's when most of your memory gets laid down. So when you're doing lots of learning, that's when your brain's working really hard at night time while you're asleep, making sure it's storing away all that information for you to be able to recall it later. And you have two different kinds of sleep. One's called REM, or dreaming sleep, and the other one is called non-REM sleep. And part of your non-REM sleep is called slow wave sleep. And this is a really deep sleep where most of your memory and learning occurs. And we know that in young children, so about 2 to 3 years of age, and in teenagers, you actually have the highest amount of that slow wave sleep that you have during your entire life, because this is when your brain is most active. And teenagers have this really cool thing that happens when they're asleep. It's called synaptic pruning. So in your brain, you've got lots of little nerve cells, and they send out all these little connections to other nerve cells, and they make new connections, and old connections sort of back off, and that actually peaks in teenagers. So it's important that they have enough sleep, otherwise those processes can't actually occur properly. So it's absolutely essential that people have adequate and restful sleep. It's not just enough to get, 4 blocks of 1 hour of sleep. You actually need to have consolidated sleep, which means it's in a big block, it's uninterrupted, and it's really restful.
Wonderful, thank you. I was just really reminiscing back to being in high school as well, then how much sleep I got. It really hasn't changed in the sense of, having so many demands on your time. Would you agree, TJ, when you think about, you mentioned you do athletics, and there's probably a number of other demands at school. Do you believe there's an impact on your wanting to be on social media, a bit of a competition between all of those things?
Yeah, most definitely.
What's a strategy you're thinking of in your mind as you hear the ladies speak at the moment?
Probably just avoiding my phone sometimes before I go to sleep. Just maybe put it outside my room.
Wonderful. Can I just jump in
Sure.
there and say there's actually been some really good research done showing that people who are in year 11 and 12 probably need at least 8 hours of sleep per night. And unfortunately, because school starts quite early, that really doesn't fit in with the shift they get when they enter puberty. With, as Emma was talking about, your melatonin secretion tends to come much later at night. So it's actually very difficult, particularly with things like lots of homework and after-school commitments and sport, for them to get an adequate amount of sleep. And a really good research study that was done in America showed if they actually delayed the school start time by an hour and a half, they were much better rested, and children were falling asleep less during the day, and their sleep was more restful. And unfortunately, that's not something that we can necessarily do, but it's really important to be mindful of all the after-school commitments people have, because it can actually really impact negatively on the amount of sleep that they get.
Really, really great points. Thank you, Adelaide. We're going to jump across down the other side of the panel now in terms of some proactive strategies. So when to worry is a very important when to worry. I'm hoping that's up there on the screen. One more. Apologies. Yeah, wonderful. So when to worry is probably a question that a lot of people have come today to address, in the sense of what kind of behavioural signs do I watch out for, and then what do I do? So we're going to move more into a practical point of view now. And I think importantly, and gentlemen, either of you can answer this one, you're both equipped. When do you worry from your positions? When do you worry in terms of we're getting into some territory where a boy's well-being might be challenged with technology?
Thank you. Just before we go there, I was really interested to hear TJ mention Exmouth and Chris talk about Karajuni. Just from that point of view, after years and years in Exmouth, and the phones go off when the boys get to Exmouth, and they don't get them back till they get back on the bus. And it's fantastic to see. By about day 3, the boys are fantastic to be around, because they don't have that. They don't have that constant influence of mobile phones. But it's also interesting to see in terms of how well their sleep patterns begin to develop on camp. They don't have that artificial stimulus at night. You tend to start to get sleepy when the sun goes down, and you wake up when the sun comes up. So, and you see that very. It's very tangible, the mood swing there. So the boys are a delight to be around from about day 3 onwards. And it's interesting, there's very few complaints about not having the mobile phone while on camp. However, on saying that, they do get stuck into them, give them a real hammering when they're back on the bus and they're in range. But in terms of starting to worry, I suppose, from my point of view, from the practical side of it, one of the major indications for me is not being ready for school. When you see boys who are physically not ready for school, and secondly, I suppose, when you see boys with a reluctance to come to school. I think there's talked about the correlation, the link between sleep, anxiety, and depression, but I also think that there are evidence there that if they're not ready, they're not getting good night's sleep, they're not completing their homework, they're not prepared for school. I think there's a correlation there with school refusal and actually attendance. So attendance for me would be one of the major areas. When I see changes in mood, I see changes in attendance. For me, that would be when I begin to see those patterns developing in boys' behaviour at school.
I imagine, Chris, from a parent's, thank you so much for that, Brett. I imagine, Chris, from a parent's perspective, you would see this as well at home, maybe mood changes?
It's interesting because very much mood changes I referred to earlier in having a phone taken away and the reconnection back with the capacity to have a relationship to having the phone back again. And that was over 2 extremes, of course, of not having a phone to then re-engaging with it very, very quickly. But I find it interesting as a parent, and very much one of the things that was interesting tonight for me was hearing the experts, the ladies, talk about the evidence and the science around some of these sorts of things, because to me the signs aren't as obvious when it comes to the sleep issue. I have a view relative to the much broader question of social media and self-esteem and the impact on our boys and young people in general, about they post something and if they don't get liked, well, what's wrong with me? And if I get lots of likes, well, I'm popular. I'm pretty good. So I think that's a much broader consideration beyond tonight. So for me, I haven't been aware of any apparent signs of the impact of sleep relative to having a mobile phone in their hand late at night, other than the world I come from was also one of you need a good night's sleep to be able to function normally. And if you're on a phone at midnight, let alone the impact of the screen and what impact that might have on your brain, and I'm interested in that as well, let alone you're actively communicating with people 8 hours before you're going to start the next day at school and you haven't even been to sleep yet. So mine's one of probably being here to have insights. I find information is empowering and empowering to have better conversations. And I know we're going to talk, I think, Nisha, about some strategies around how we may go forward with some of these sorts of things. But mine's not one of obvious evidence that's impacting on them, but it's more about the experts and their perspective on that.
Can I jump in there just to answer some of that? So I spoke about the baby hormone, the melatonin. Our screens don't allow for the release of melatonin, so there are some blue screens.
Yeah, so we know that when you use a mobile phone or an iPad or a computer or even watch TV at night time, the screens actually emit a blue light, and that actually feeds back through your eyes to your brain and stops your brain releasing your melatonin. So normally at night time when it starts to get dark, that's a signal via your eyes to your brain. It's nighttime, it's dark. Let's release this melatonin. It's time to start to wind down and get ready for sleep. And when you are sleeping throughout the night, your brain keeps releasing that melatonin. And when the sun starts to rise in the morning, that actually sends another signal to your brain. It's daytime, stop releasing that melatonin. Let's get up and get ready for the day. And we know that forms of technology actually inhibit your brain from being able to release that melatonin normally. This is even more of a problem in young people and teenagers because when you start to go through puberty, your brain starts to release that melatonin quite late at night, as you were saying before. So it's already harder for young people to fall asleep at the time they kind of need to, maybe sort of 8 or 9 o'clock. And then if you're using a phone on top of it, then it's going to be very difficult to fall asleep at a time where you'll get adequate sleep.
And to that extent, what do you see as more impactful? Is it the screen time or the minds are still active? And the reason I ask that is I watched the golfers. Some people may have watched over the last couple of days the British Open, and it finished at 3 a.m. And I'm a bit of a golf nut, but I go to bed and I was still wide awake at 4 a.m. Wide awake. So from our boys' perspective, is it more the fact of they're looking at a screen that's impacting their capacity or ability to be able to sleep, or is it what their mind is actually doing?
So that's a really good question. It's actually both. So we know that there is a physical effect from the blue light on your melatonin secretion. That's absolutely the case. But also your brain gets a stimulating effect just from the fact that you're reading something or you're watching a video or you're getting likes on Instagram, big dopamine hit. All of those things actually activate your brain and make it harder to wind down. So it's actually both of them and they work together. So the more exciting the thing that you're watching, I'd probably fall asleep if it was golf, to be honest, but if you often see, you might watch like, a really sort of scary movie or something at night, and it's really hard to fall asleep because your brain is like wired and ready to go and ready to respond. So it's both of those things.
Just to add something, I guess from a student's perspective, is a lot of us, when we use our phones at night, we kind of have the excuse that, we got night mode on and it's kind of like stopping all that blue light. Does that actually do anything or not?
In some ways, you've got to have the right kind of thing. If you just dim the screen, it doesn't do anything. But there are actually programs you can get. There's one called F-Lux, L-U-X, that you can use on your laptop that will actually reduce the amount of blue light that comes out. But again, it's only going to help a little bit. It's actually much better to just turn off the phone and not use it.
Adelaide, did you have anything else to add? No, that's all? Yeah, no, wonderful. Also, Emma, I understand from a behavioural perspective there may be a few more strategies that we were going to talk through. Anything to add at this stage?
I guess just taking a step back when we were talking about when to be worried, and I was really glad to hear the word change. So we all know our children, the children know themselves. Some children are very quiet by nature, and so if you look at a child and you're like, that child's very quiet, what's wrong with them? That's not the way we want to look at it. We want to look at changes. So if you've got a very extroverted, very social child, and over time you're noticing them withdraw more, they're not talking with their friends in person, they're on this phone all the time, they're not engaging with you, they're snappy when you ask them to put their phone away, they're anxious when they're away from their phone. Those kind of changes are what we really want to be thinking about, and that might be a point that you might start to worry. As Adelaide mentioned, there is a lot of mental health conditions like anxiety and depression that have sleep issues as part of the mental health condition, so it can get really complicated really quickly. And so if you are noticing that the young person in your family or yourselves is struggling with any major changes over a long period, it's really worth having a discussion with your GP. That's your first port of call, really to chat through what you've noticed, even if it's just for the GP to say, no, that's okay, I don't think we need to worry at this stage, come back after a few months. Or if they say, I think it would be worth doing a mental health care plan, going to see a psychologist, or perhaps if it's quite extreme, a referral to a pediatrician. So there are times where we do have to take things seriously, and change is the key.
Wonderful, absolutely. Thanks, Emma. I just wanted to add to that, if you're noticing that you're having a lot of trouble falling asleep at night, or the big flag for me is you're waking up in the morning feeling unrefreshed, like you haven't slept, it's important to, again, see your GP as your first point of call to make sure there's no sort of major medical problems, and they may actually refer you on to a sleep clinic like the one I work at Perth Children's Hospital. Also, just to expand on what Brett was saying, we often do see young people in the sleep clinic because of problems like school refusal or difficulties, their grades are dropping at school, or they're having difficulties with concentration and memory, and often a referral to the sleep clinic is part of, is this actually a sleep problem which is causing this? And we see lots of young people with anxiety and depression where the sleep is a big part of their symptoms, and we may even see young people for the first time who've been referred to our sleep clinic and the problem is actually anxiety or depression. So again, your GP is always a good first port of call for any concerns about sleep, and they'll refer you on if needed.
Thank you, ladies. Fantastic. I'm going to throw back to Brett now. So from the perspective of a Hale leader, you're obviously at the coalface and seeing quite acute presentations at points in time from the Hale boys. Can you talk me through what your view is?
Thanks. As I said earlier, good sleep's important for success, whether it's academic success or success in sport. I know that's really important to someone like TJ with his high-level swimming. But I think boys that present with poor sleep and finding those links between sleeping and anxiety and depression, I see the impact in terms of getting to school in the mornings, which we've touched on, and that can be a real tough challenge for the family, for parents trying to get their boys up and get them to school on time. Very often they're getting up 20 minutes before they need to be here. So yeah, punctuality, attendance at school, and school refusal. We see issues with poor organisational planning skills, and it can be heightened during periods, examination periods, and where there's lots of assessments coming in. And I think Geordie and TJ probably can speak a little bit about that as well in terms of importance around getting good sleep around exam time, and especially when there's assessments coming up. Just functioning effectively during the day. Hale's a very busy place, and there's so much going on. School's no longer from 8:30 till 3:30. It's the boys are doing things in the mornings. They're involved in co-curricular in the afternoon, sport straight after school, and sometimes goes well into the evening. So being able to function effectively throughout the day is very important. From my point of view, it's interesting that we tend to look at our health centre to give boys a little bit of time out sometimes in terms of a rest during the day for boys who are struggling with issues around sleep and anxiety. I think we see it in terms of being able to establish good relationships with peers and teachers as well, picking up on thoughts from the other side of the panel. And just some of the more simple tasks like completing homework tasks and assignments as well. So that's my view in this. I think it's really important that we also we need to achieve a balance, and it's, as we've learnt tonight, it's more important as the boys get older. Their lives get busier, but also sleep almost becomes more important. So around that year 11 and 12 time, it's very, very important that sleep is part of your regime and part of that balance.
Just picking up on what you said there, Brett, about balance, I think that's critical. In terms of when you move into the professional world, and I alluded to from a personal perspective in my sort of intergeneration mix, is I've just come back from a conference where gamification, AI, virtual teams, a lot of media, potentially when these gentlemen go to university as well and start to play maybe wherever you end up in entrepreneur, I'm sure very successful, spaces, there is a requirement to have knowledge of and ability to play in that space. But I think just blending everybody's views together is about finding that balance between function and dysfunction. And, you know, potentially as well, I know that Hale has a very good pastoral care program to assist the gentlemen, but also we know, probably as psychologists and medical professionals, that it's extremely important that that understanding comes from within. So with leaving that thought in mind, I'd like to get some of the student perspectives briefly before we move on to some practical steps as well. So Jordan, from listening to all the perspectives on the panel, particularly Brett from a Hale perspective as well, can you share with us, I guess, your overall view on what you've taken away today?
Yeah, it's been quite interesting and eye-opening, almost ironically, but no, certainly as an avid human biology student, listening to some of the kind of science behind it, and certainly in the hormones and sleep cycle, and certainly stuff that we've done in human biology, kind of like applying that to actually us and not just our textbooks where we kind of spend most of our time. I guess in year 12 it's hard because academics seems to be the kind of thing that we probably worry about too much, and the pressure of exams and the pressure of tests and the pressure of doing well, that we kind of spend a lot of time in our textbooks and stuff, and almost too much time that we don't have enough hours to sleep. Certainly in most of the blokes that I talk to and most of my friends, usually about 6 to 6.5 hours is usually what we kind of aim to get each night, or what we get each night, because we just, I don't know, want to study so much, and obviously with so many co-curricular things and being kind of leaders within the school, you have some added responsibilities around that. So I guess a lot of us turn to things like stimulants, like coffee and stuff, I guess, to help us through the day, you know, whether we have some at night to get us through our homework early in the morning to get through the day, or kind of freshen us up for a test or something. I don't know, it seems to be pretty hard to do it without things like that. And I guess listening to all of that, it kind of puts in perspective maybe you need to change some things around, certainly using our mobile phones close to our bedtime and when we fall asleep. I know certainly for me, I always like to, after I study, I find it hard to just hit the hay straight away and go to bed, so I usually watch something boring on YouTube, maybe something to do with like a crash course, or something to do with philosophy, so that it kind of bores me a bit. Maybe watch golf or something, I don't know. But
philosophy teachers here.
But yeah, I find that kind of slows my brain down, I guess. I don't know, for me, I just find it hard to go from studying, and then hit the pillow and go to bed. I kind of have to unwind a bit, so I don't know. In that perspective, I guess my mobile phone might be helpful for that.
Wonderful, thank you, Jordan. I'd like to extend from that over to ask you, TJ, if we were to provide advice, so let's switch seats. Let's say you were a parent providing advice about how to engage your teenager to decrease the phone use. What would you advise parents? What practical steps? And I'm throwing you under the bus here a little bit because I haven't prepped him on this, but I just find it quite interesting, and feel free to jump in. But what advice would you give for a parent to actively encourage someone like yourself to decrease your phone use?
Well, I would definitely get the parents to just check in on their children to just see what's happening with their lives and their phone usage, because I know one of my friends, he's always on his phone, and when it gets taken off, he's almost really irritated. So maybe just if his parents were to just check in on him just once or twice a week, just see what's going on with his phone and what he's doing. Also, as a parent, well, my mum has a time limit on my phone that switches my phone off at 10 o'clock each night. So maybe that could be a good idea. I don't like it, but it took some getting used to, but now I think it's good. But yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. That's fine. Look, we could talk about this probably for a lot longer as well, but just before we sort of end the panel so we can ask some questions, I'd like to just open it out to the wider panel to add any other practical steps or strategies for our parents here and for students in general. I can see Brett.
Monday mornings and this time, a day or so before the boys come back to school, always concerns me. It's really, I think it's very important that you establish good patterns around sleep and mobile phone use. I think they go hand in hand. That apply to holidays and school time. We as teachers, we expect boys to come back from holidays and be refreshed, have good patterns in place, whether they're sleep patterns or their mobile phone use. And the reality is, a lot of families and a lot of parents and a lot of boys think, I'm on holidays, I get more time, more screen time, I don't have to worry about my sleep. My sleep patterns switch from perhaps going to bed at 9 o'clock at night to going to bed at midnight or later, and then getting up at 10 or 11 o'clock because it's on the holidays. And so then we expect our boys to come back to school and fire on day one when their sleep patterns have been completely interrupted either on holidays or the weekends. So I think it's really important that, and I'm not old enough yet to not remember being a teenager, and you want to let your hair down and enjoy the holidays as well, but a practical thing, a practical thing that I think that can be put in place, and my advice to parents is that you get your boys ready for school, and not on Tuesday night for when they get back on Wednesday, and in Geordie's case it's Tuesday tomorrow, but you get your boys ready for school, you keep those patterns up, and perhaps in the second week of holidays you're actually preparing those sleep patterns and putting those good structures around mobile phones. And that way the boys get back to school and they've got those routines in place. So I think that's one sort of practical piece of advice.
Wonderful. Chris, what are your thoughts as a parent?
Well, perhaps some of the parents here may be wondering, how does my son have a phone at 12:30 at night? And talking to my friends, there's varying strategies. You have a box that everybody's technology goes into at 8:30 and the like, and I don't know how, but after we fall asleep, they find the phones. That hasn't worked too well. And I think what's come out of this for me, and probably since I started the conversation with Dean, is our role as parents and our responsibilities, as I mentioned earlier, but consistent with what Brett's referring to, is we have a responsibility for our boys to turn up to school in the best shape they can turn up to school, let alone the broader perspective of life and being able to function as some of the issues have been put on the table in the panel this evening. So we have a responsibility to do that, and to the extent, and there's so many other analogies you could use, but I imagine if you use sport, TJ, by way of example, and you're playing professional sport and the athlete turns up and they've had 3 hours sleep and they're socially all over the place relative to self-esteem and other matters, and I'd imagine the coach is going to receive that too well. Yet, I think as a parent, what's really important in coming out of this is there's the battles that you need to fight, and as I used earlier, the term, lose battles to win wars, but there's things that we do need to not seek to battle with our boys about, but what are the important matters that we need to be very deliberate about, and the significance of sleep and the impact on their lives and their capacity to be able to function effectively, and in this instance give the school the best chance to help our boys be the best they can be, is so significantly influenced by how they show up, and being on the phone at 12:30 is not going to help that. So it really does without having an answer to the strategy, really reinvigorate the significance of a matter as a parent that we need to take a very proactive responsibility in.
Wonderful, thank you, Chris. We'll jump across, gentlemen, back to you in a moment. I just wanted to jump across to our experts as well, and I'm looking up there, but guidelines for sleep and screens, we do have some, so let's talk through them.
Yeah, so we know that teenagers need 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night in order to function well. It is more for little people, so primary school 9 to 11 hours of sleep a night, and adults 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. Now there are obviously individual differences in that. Some people can function on a lot less sleep. It's to do with daytime fatigue. If you're tired during the day, if you're falling asleep, if you're needing naps, then you're not getting enough sleep. We know that with screens, we recommend all age of children have less than 2 hours of screens a day. Now that's hard because you're on screens when you're on your laptops at school. That is screen time. You're watching TV, that is screen time. So it's about starting the conversation and seeing what's reasonable for you and your families. And we do know that although you might think watching philosophy, which that would keep me awake, watching philosophy on YouTube, it relaxes me. It's still giving you the blue effect. And if we did a sleep study on you, you won't be going into REM as soon as you need to and getting the full range of circadian rhythms that you need to get a good night's sleep. So half an hour at least, if not an hour before bedtime, that the phones are being put away. And moving on to the practical steps as well. Parents, and adults, we are role models for our children, and it's hypocritical to tell your children, right, 7 o'clock, give me your phone, and then we're just scrolling through whatever we're scrolling through. Work as a family, work together, establish some rules that are fair for everybody. So have a think about for the parents and the children to put the phones away for an hour when you eat dinner, for example, that you have a really good conversation about the day and there's no phones on the table. So little things like that, turn the Wi-Fi off. There's lots of different things that you can do. Be deliberate. I think one of the things that came through really strongly was when phones are taken away from you when you go to Exmouth or you go to Vietnam or wherever you're going, you adapt. As soon as you're back in Wi-Fi zone, you're back onto the phone. So we're creatures of habit, we're addicted to our phones, so we need to be very deliberate with decreasing our usage of phones if we feel that it's affecting our well-being. So it's really making those deliberate intentions and saying, okay, I'm going to do this for me, I'm going to turn my phone off at 8 o'clock every night, and that's what I'm doing. So do it for yourself, do it for your family, be a good role model, work together, talk together, start the conversations from today. This is just the starting point.
Wonderful. And Dr. Withers, a short amount from you, and then we're going to throw it out for questions because I'm sure that we've got a few out there too.
Yeah, so backing up what Ema was saying, obviously be a good role model yourself. It is unfair to ask young people not to use their phones at night when we're all scrolling through Instagram ourselves. I think to highlight something TJ picked up on, actually you said really nicely, check in with your young person. You need to know what's going on with them, and again, the evidence shows young people are using mobile phones very late at night, and unless you're actually engaging with your young person in your life, you're not going to know that. So you know what they're up to, and just really basic sleep hygiene things like making sure you actually use your bed for sleeping only. You're not in there studying, you're not in there, eating in your bed. You should use your bed for sleeping, and that's it. There should not be a phone or a TV or an iPad in your bedroom, because we know that they're big distractions and they will prevent you from falling asleep. And I'd also like to highlight, if you are concerned about your sleep or your teenager's sleep, please go see your GP and talk to them, because sometimes it can actually be a medical problem which needs to be addressed, which is impacting on their sleep. So I'll hand back to you.
Wonderful, thank you. Oh, it's okay, yeah, absolutely.
Just picking up on the point about no mobile phones in the bedroom or any device for that matter. When we were doing the interviews with the boys, most of them said that they used the mobile phone as an alarm clock. And I've heard the headmaster say this, but buy a cheap $5 alarm clock at Woolworths or Coles, or it's not an endorsement, or Aldi now, I suppose, isn't it? Yeah.
Being very fair, Brett.
Yeah, and don't don't fall for that trap of, I need my mobile phone beside my bed because it's my alarm clock. I think that's also another practical step in keeping the devices out of the bedroom.
Thank you, Brett. I've heard that you can get a clock now. When it goes off, it runs off, so you actually have to get up and chase it in order to stop it. That can be very useful. Okay, so I'd like to thank all our panel of experts for all of your contribution this evening. Please join me in a warm thank you. Okay, what we'd like to do now is open up to a few questions. As I mentioned, our experts kindly will be available after this evening as well if you've got any sort of one-on-one questions you want to ask. Probably the best way to do this, I'm thinking, Dean, because we'll have to bring the microphone down, is if you'd like to raise your hand if you've got a question, we'll bring the microphone to you. And I might come down as well to help out because it'll be the we'll need one microphone. Here as well.
Hello, first I just want to say, very interesting. My question is, would you say it's more effective to go to sleep earlier and wake up earlier, or go to sleep later and then wake up later?
So that's a really interesting question, and partially it depends on what's called your chronotype. So everyone is either basically a day person or a night person, and some people find that they're actually much more effective at night time, and it's very difficult for them to fall asleep sort of early in the evening, even if they need to get an increased amount of sleep. And it's actually very difficult to change your chronotype. And night people tend to find that in high school they really struggle because they just can't get enough sleep, because they can't fall asleep before maybe 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night. And that means to get an adequate amount of sleep, they actually need to sleep later the next day, which you can't do if you need to get up at 5:30 or 6 to get ready for school. And people who are night people often find that after they finish school, they might want to work in something like the hospitality industry, where often people can work in the evening or night shifts, but you're kind of stuck when you're in high school. So I would say it is better for you to try and sleep earlier and get up earlier, because that helps reset your natural circadian rhythm. And there are ways that you can do that, such as using really bright lights first thing in the morning when you get up. That helps signal to your brain it's daytime, no more melatonin. So you can actually buy bright photosensitive lights that you can use in your home to try and help wake your brain up in the morning. And I'll often tell people, go have your breakfast outside. It's actually really, really helpful getting that light early in the morning.
Okay, I think there's a microphone down here. Yeah, this is for the young gentleman up there. I'm probably a caveman compared to you. But I'd like to ask you, there's a lot of peer pressure to have a phone and all this type of business. I'm assuming you don't pay for your phone, you don't pay for your data. How many of your friends actually don't have a phone?
Maybe like 2. I'm not sure. I know everyone I know probably has a phone. Yeah,
I do know one kid who was on his phone too much, so his parents made him get a flip phone so that he couldn't really use it for Instagram and all that. But he actually went out and bought a mobile phone, and then they found it, so it got confiscated, and he bought another one. So, look, I don't know anyone of our year that doesn't have a phone. It seems to be kind of a thing that it's almost a necessity, and that's probably a bad thing. But yeah, I guess pretty much everyone.
A necessity for what?
I don't know, just a social necessity. I'm not sure if there's much reason behind it, except you have it because everyone else has it, and maybe that's a kind of peer pressure thing, but it just seems to be you have to be updated on the world, you have to know what's going on around your friendship groups and pretty much anyone else, but yeah, for that reason, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to add that a lot of the research around sleep and mobile phone use in young people has really highlighted they have this need to feel connected to their friends and this need to be available at all times for social interaction or, liking the same post or whatever it is. And that was something that was identified as actually having a really significant impact on their mental health as well. Because if you removed that sort of ability to connect with their friends, that was actually quite detrimental in their perspective towards their mental health.
So we have a 15-year-old son and a 17-year-old daughter. It hasn't been as much of an issue for our son yet, but we were having the kids turn in all their gadgets at 9 o'clock, and that seemed to work well. But then our daughter, kind of fairly said, and I suspect it'll happen for our son too, between extracurricular activities and homework and all that, and they're not allowed to have their phone during the day. I guess the question is, we're trying to find a balance between what's fair to them and what's comfortable for us. So I don't know if anybody can address that. I still don't know what the answer is and what's right for our family, but she brought up a good point. Like, when is she really able to have some private time on her phone with all those other things going on?
Do you want to answer that one? I guess just from my perspective, I think it is important that they do have time to connect with their friends, but I would say it should be much earlier in the evening when it's not going to be so detrimental to the effect of the melatonin secretion.
So if we look at you as a family unit, you've got 4 people in the family, there's no other people in the family. So what I might suggest is that you each make a proposal and you say, look, for the first week, we're going to try this. For the next week, we're going to try this. For the next week, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end of the 4 weeks, get together and go, you know what, that really didn't work for me because of this, but it really worked for me. Okay, can we scale that back? So look at it as an experiment. You're a scientist in your own life. You can decide as a family what you want to do. And with 15 and 17-year-olds, I think giving them ownership and saying, I mean, there's a lot of TV shows on this where you flip the family and whatnot. But in this case, I think give them the chance to say, you know what, Mum and Dad, I don't want you to be on your phone either. I'm sick of trying to talk to you and you're checking this, that, and your work emails or whatever. So have a play. Approach it not as a problem, but as, I guess, something that is an experiment. Yeah.
Oh, mine was actually a book recommendation, because a lot of the things that have come up tonight, and thank you very much to the panel, I've started reading a book today by David Gillespie, and it's called Teen Brain. So if anyone in the audience wants to, obviously people are interested in the addiction to tech with our teenagers, Teen Brain by David Gillespie seems to be covering a lot of these aspects.
First of all, thanks to all the panellists. It's been a very interesting discussion tonight. I'd like to just make a comment and put a question mainly to the 2 young men on the panel there, but also to the others perhaps. And it relates really to, I think, what's driving some of the behaviours in terms of mobile phones. And I think it relates to our need as a human being to be connected. And I think this is my own perspective, and I'd very much welcome your views on what I'm about to say. I think that those pressures are even greater in your adolescent and teenage years. The need to feel connected and the desire not to be isolated. And I think, as Adelaide has pointed out, the statistics show that a lot of this interaction is occurring quite late at night. So, and biologically that's bad for our sleep, as has been pointed out. But I think the need to be connected and the hurt, I guess, that occurs from being isolated because you're not being included in those are driving a lot of this behaviour. And to some extent, this is a problem a bit like climate change. One family can't solve this problem. It's a community problem. I think if half of the herd is connected and you're isolated from that connection, that's a problem. So I don't know what the solution is, but I'd like the perspective of the schoolboys on the panel about, is that something that you see that's driving a lot of this, the need to go out and buy a mobile phone when it gets confiscated so that you can continue to communicate with your peer group?
Yeah, definitely, for sure. I think, as you said before, if you take mobile phones away late at night when, as we said, a lot of the communication takes place, then you're isolated from that. So, as you said, it can't be a single solution where, well, if one family takes their child's phone away at 10 o'clock, then there's still, thousands that are still using their phone at night, so they feel isolated from the rest of them. So it's something that would have to be addressed entirely. I can't really think of a way to do that apart from educating on the science behind it and the reasons why it's not good. But I guess, as we kind of heard from the research, that the teenage brain doesn't really want to go to bed until much later than the adult brain, so they're still kind of thinking about the day, still trying to get involved with what's going on around them, and that kind of social pressure of staying connected, especially in such, I guess, fragile times for a teenage developing brain in terms of their social skills and in terms of wanting to fit in to society and their friends. So I guess I don't really have an answer. And TJ, you wanted to add anything to that?
Oh, well, I think that we want to be on our phones because we are heavily bombarded with advertisements about different technology coming out each and every day, new apps, new updates, and there's always just discussion about even the Instagram likes recently that could just trigger some people into just wanting to go more on their mobile phones. Yeah.
I think it was really interesting when Instagram removed the likes, because I sort of went, gee, as an adolescent doctor, I think that's maybe a good thing, because, a lot of young people are getting quite distressed if, they're not getting the likes, or, people putting negative comments on their photos. And then I found myself putting something on Instagram and going, what's the point if I don't get any likes? And that's when I decided I probably needed a break from Instagram, because it's not a good thing. It's this constant need for validation. And when you get a text message back, or you get a like on your photo, or you get a new friend request, that's a little dopamine hit. That's a good thing. And I think we're becoming so reliant on technology for providing us that positive feedback and that affirmation that's why we feel so terrible when we're disconnected from everybody else when our phone's taken away.
One more question just here in the middle, if we can. We'll probably conclude on that for now.
I was interested to know what you would recommend in terms of a wind-down routine for teenagers and younger children, because in my family I was always taught that bedtime is you go to bed with a book and then you're allowed to read it until lights out, but I'm not sure whether that's going to cause stimulation or if actually that's a good thing to wind down the teenage brain.
It depends on the content of the book. So if you're reading horror thrillers, they will activate our brains. So philosophy, perhaps. Something that's not going to, I guess, arouse us emotionally would be a good idea.
I agree with that, and really focusing on quiet activities before bedtime. So I'll often recommend things like have a bath or a shower, because that's actually quite relaxing, and avoiding doing exercise sort of late in the evening, because that's very stimulating to your brain. And reading is actually a pretty good thing to do. Again, obviously you get some light from your ambient lighting, but as long as it's a book that's not too stimulating, that's a really good way to wind down in bed. And yeah, there's some really good books that are really boring that I often recommend that work quite well to help people fall asleep.
A huge thank you to our panel once again. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'll now hand back to Dean to close the evening.
Nisha, thanks very much. Thank you for hosting that. That's fantastic. I do just want to especially thank our external guests, so both Adelaide and Ama, because I know that they are very busy people. That's not to say you're not, Chris, but you're a part of our community. And in a sense, so are you, Nisha, and so on it goes. But thank you very much to everybody. And there is a small gift. David's got a small gift. He's just going to hand it out. It's a bit process-driven, but we just want to get those out quickly so I can say a few concluding comments. One more round of applause, please. Thank you very much for all your time. From me. Firstly, thank you to Brendan, who's up the back there, and Ollie, who've hosted tonight. Brendan's actually got the live streaming going, so I'm hoping that a number of our boarding families have been tuning in as well. And I just want to revisit that idea with boarding as I touched on. And I think Bijan Singh touched on this idea, the fear of missing out, FOMO. And that's why it's been so successful in boarding, because your collective friends are all handing their phones in at night, and so you don't have that same yearning for your phone because you know it's happening for everybody else within your immediate world. That's what we're missing in the day school, and one of the things that I'm hoping that we can deliver, although there's a small representation here tonight, we're hoping to deliver, I guess, a position. And one of the things that we will be doing is developing a position paper on sleep and phones that we can share amongst our day families, and that will give you collective strength to be able to have the conversations, not to argue and say, here's the only way to do it, but to actually inform. And I heard, and amongst this particular panel, people also say that one of the best things we can do is, rather than just exclude, is to ask these young people to actually trial things differently and then actually ask them to reflect and feel how that changed things for them. I mean, my own personal view, depending on the age of your child, you may not be in this realisation yet, but as an educator and definitely as a parent I am, the horse has bolted, right? Phones are not going away. When I was 15, 16, I had arguments with my father, about using the old telephone, right? You know, and he's like, why do you have to be on the telephone every night? Because I need to catch up with such and such. You know, and he was just beside himself as to why I need, you know, you got 15 minutes, 45 minutes later, I'm still on the phone, It's just moved on. I think the need to feel connected as young people is actually a good sign, right? They're developing skills and learning so much through communicating and through connection. It's a different medium now, and it's one that has many sharp edges on it, and that's what we're aiming to do. So just by way of conclusion, I'll look forward to sharing a position from Hale School on this with you, and I hope that that will be an ongoing conversation which will change. It may develop into some directional policies that we can use, I don't know, but as I said at the beginning, we wanted to have a Q&D, if you will, question and discussion, just to tease out and hear some of the issues. We've recorded that, we can use that to go away and develop. Rather than actually stand here and lecture at you all night. So I hope it has been very useful. Thank you very much. Before you depart, I'm going to ask the panel, if half the panel can go out that door and the other half go out this door so that they're out in the foyer. You might like to bump into them, ask a couple of last questions. Again, thanks very much for the night. Have a very good term 3. Thank you.